You're lying in bed, the room is still, the air is soft, and somewhere nearby, your shoes are resting. Maybe at the door, maybe beside the couch, maybe still on your feet, untied, waiting for the day to fully end. You barely noticed them today, just slipped them on and went. But tonight, we're going to follow them back in time. Before closets, before sidewalks, before shoelaces and buckles and brand names, we're going to follow the long, quiet journey of something you wear every day and almost never think about. Shoes. Before cities. Before stories. Before roads or wheels or written words, there were feet. Human feet, tough but vulnerable, stepping carefully across stone and brush and bramble. Nature never softened the ground for us. So early humans adapted. They wrapped their feet in whatever they could find. Strips of bark, twisted grass, soft hide from hunted animals. It wasn't fashion, it was protection. A barrier between skin and everything sharp, cold, or crawling. In what is now Oregon, inside a quiet cave called Fort Rock, archaeologists uncovered the remains of the oldest known shoes, rough sandals made of woven sagebrush bark, more than 10,000 years old, tattered, fragile, shaped by hands that lived long before nations, borders, or boots. Someone knelt there once, fingers twisting bark into loops, thinking not about style, but survival. Far across the world, in ancient Armenia, another shoe sat undisturbed for 5,000 years. A single, perfectly preserved leather shoe tucked into the dirt of a cave. It was soft, laced, molded to the shape of a foot. Surprisingly modern, surprisingly familiar. You could almost wear it now, except you wouldn't want to, because it isn't just a shoe anymore. It's a whisper from the past, a reminder that feet have always needed help, that even the earliest humans tried to soften the world under their steps. And shoes, in those days, weren't uniform. They changed with the land. In dry places, open sandals let air pass through. In cold places, feet were wrapped in fur. In wet forests, thick leather kept out the damp. People shaped their shoes from what was nearby: bark, fiber, hide, grass. The form followed the foot and the need. But slowly, need gave way to meaning. In ancient Egypt, sandals were made of papyrus, palm fiber, or tanned leather. Simple, efficient. But not all sandals were the same. Richer Egyptians wore theirs elevated with wooden soles. Some were painted, gilded, or beaded. Pharaohs had gold-threaded straps. Slaves, on the other hand, often went barefoot. The difference wasn't just comfort, it was power. A pair of shoes could signal your place in the world, how far you were allowed to go, and where you had to stop. Across the ancient world, shoes followed similar patterns. In Mesopotamia, there were pointed slippers made of dyed leather. In early India, wooden sandals called padukas supported the feet of priests and nobles. Just a flat sole with a knob between the toes, held on by pressure alone. You didn't run in padukas, you moved slowly, deliberately. They weren't just footwear, they were status. And in China, shoes were made of hemp, later of silk, carefully sewn, often embroidered. For the wealthy, shoes were soft, elegant, light as breath. For the poor, simple, rugged, built to last. Over time, ornate slippers emerged. Platform soles lifted wearers higher. Symbols stitched into fabric told stories without sound. Shoes became more than shields. They became mirrors. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, something new was unfolding. The Greeks and Romans didn't just wear shoes, they engineered them. In ancient Greece, shoes were practical, but thoughtful. Crafted not just to protect, but to express. Greeks spent much of their lives outdoors, walking city streets, climbing marble steps, gathering in open-air theaters and sunlit forums. Their footwear had to keep up. Most Greeks wore sandals, flat soles strapped with leather thongs, open to the air, light and flexible. But even within simplicity, there was nuance. The shape of the sole, the number of straps, how high they laced up the leg. Each small detail whispered something about who you were. The word for shoe was krepis. There were variants: high sandals for soldiers, soft slippers for indoors, practical boots for travelers. The cobbler's workshop was a common sight. Shoemakers weren't rich, but they were respected. A good pair of shoes, after all, could outlast a tunic. In Greek plays, shoes often symbolized a character's role in life. Humble sandals for peasants, elevated heels for actors playing gods. Shoes weren't just props, they were signals. The Romans took things further. Roman footwear was a system, a coded language of class, rank, duty. Caligae were the heavy-soled, open-laced marching boots worn by legionaries. Thick hobnails studded the bottom to grip soil and stone. Soldiers marched for miles, and those boots carried the empire with them. Patricians and senators, meanwhile, wore the calceus, a closed shoe, polished, refined, fastened with elaborate straps. Certain colors were restricted. Red or black leather could indicate rank. Even children's shoes came in miniature forms of adult designs, early training in status. Roman shoemakers, called sutores, worked with precision. Their shops smelled of fresh leather and beeswax polish. Footwear was fitted, sometimes decorated, but never overdone. Practicality mattered. Even emperors wore sandals. And still, differences showed. Some had gold thread woven into the straps. Some added studs, gemstones, dyed accents. You could tell a man's business, his standing, even his mood, by looking at his shoes. In both Greece and Rome, shoes began to touch something deeper than fashion. They marked identity, movement, the boundary between citizen and slave, between soldier and scholar. They were worn with pride, sometimes removed with reverence. In temples, you left your shoes at the threshold. In mourning, you might walk barefoot. In celebration, you might wear something new, gleaming, fragrant, with fresh polish. But beyond function or status, shoes in these cultures told a bigger story, that of civilization itself. Roads were being built, distances shortened. Commerce and culture flowed faster than ever before. And people moved with purpose. They didn't just walk, they traveled. Shoes became essential not just for protection, but for progress. As the Roman Empire stretched across continents, so did its footwear. Roman designs influenced those in Britain, Gaul, Egypt, and beyond. Shoemaking techniques traveled with the legions: leather tanning, sole stitching, strap shaping. Local cultures absorbed these ideas, then made them their own. And as empires eventually faltered, the shoes remained, left behind in ruins, preserved in mud, buried in volcanic ash, or sealed in tombs. Archaeologists still find them, curled with age, softened with time, but unmistakable in shape. A human foot once lived here, stood here, walked here, and that sense, that connection, carried forward into the next era. Because while empires rise and fall, the need to walk, and the shoes we walk in, never disappears. Now the roads are rougher, the air colder, The Roman Empire has crumbled, and Europe has entered the long, winding corridor of the Middle Ages. Castles rise, markets scatter. Villages press against forests. The pace of life slows, and shoes follow. In this era, practicality dominates. Shoes are not made to flatter, they're made to endure. For most people, that means leather, thick, stitched, and simple. A single piece, wrapped and tied, sometimes open at the toe, sometimes just a flap over the top. Laces are rare, buckles rarer still. You wear what you can afford, and if it tears, you mend it. Or you go without. Most people walk long distances every day across mud, snow, gravel, ash. Shoes don't stay clean. They don't stay dry. And there aren't many. You might own one pair, maybe two. And when they wear out, as they always do, you patch the sole, wrap it tighter, and keep moving. But even in this hard-worn world, shoes begin to show personality. In noble courts, fashion finds its foothold again. Pointed toes come into style, sharp, exaggerated, almost playful. These shoes are called poulain, or Krakows, named after Krakow, where the style first gained popularity. The longer the toe, the higher the status. Some nobles wear shoes with tips so extended they need to be tied to the wearer's shin just to walk. They're impractical, imprudent, but unmistakable. Sumptuary laws soon follow, rules about who can wear what and how long the point may be. Because shoes, again, are saying too much. And not everyone is allowed to speak that way. Beneath the castles, the story is different. In villages, peasants wrap their feet in rags, in scraps, in whatever can get them through winter. Some go barefoot for most of the year. In forests, hunters wear boots reinforced with fur and hide. In towns, cobblers hammer soles by hand, their shops echoing with the ring of nails and the hiss of hot wax. A good cobbler is respected and busy. Shoemaking is local, intimate. Your shoes are made by someone who knows your gait, who has watched you walk, who has seen how you carry yourself. Each pair shaped not just for feet, but for lives, and sometimes for death. It's in this era that burial shoes become common. Soft leather slippers, simple and undecorated, made for those who will never walk again. They aren't made to last. They're made to honor. To send someone on their final journey dressed with care, even where no footsteps follow. Meanwhile, in monasteries, silence echoes under stone arches. Monks wear sandals or boots, plain and heavy, built for prayer and labor. The floors are cold, the days are long, the shoes are tools, symbols of humility. In medieval Japan, wooden geta clack against temple paths. In the Middle East, pointed slippers curl upward with elegance. In the Arctic, the Inuit craft boots from sealskin, watertight, warm, stitched with bone needles by firelight. Every region answers the same question in its own way. How do we protect our feet from the world? And slowly, answers evolve. By the late medieval period, shoes begin to come in left and right forms again, a distinction that had disappeared after the Romans. Until then, most shoes had been symmetrical, flat, interchangeable. But feet are not the same. People begin to notice, and slowly, cobblers adjust. The upper classes experiment more. Heels begin to appear, not as style, but as practicality. Persian horse riders wear small heels to help secure their stance in stirrups. The idea spreads. In time, it will transform entirely. But for now, it's just beginning. Shoes are still mostly stitched by hand. There are no machines, no standard sizes. You buy shoes made for you, or you make do. They wear quickly. They change with the weather, and they carry you through a world that's often dark, damp, and slow. But still, they carry you through mud and mist, through cobblestone alleys and candlelit halls, across moats, into churches, into battlefields, into new centuries. Step by step, shoes walk us through the long night of the medieval world and into something brighter. The world brightens. Art returns to walls. Music spills from chambers. Cities glow with new ambition. It's the Renaissance, and shoes, like everything else, begin to change. Slowly at first, then with a kind of theatrical flourish. They aren't just worn, they're noticed. In Italy and France, fashion becomes performance. The nobility dresses not just to cover themselves, but to astonish. Fabrics shimmer, silhouettes swell, and on the feet, something bold begins to appear. Platforms, raised soles, shoes that lift you off the ground and ask the world to look up. In Venice, they're called chopines, towering, layered shoes, some over 20 inches high, worn mostly by women, often covered in velvet or silk, lavishly embroidered. But they weren't designed for walking. They were designed to be seen, to transform the wearer into something untouchable, elevated, surreal. Walking in them required assistance, servants, balance, practice, and yet they thrived. Because height meant wealth, impracticality meant status. If you could afford to wear shoes, you could barely walk in. That meant something. Elsewhere, heels were evolving. No longer just for horse riders, they became symbols of aristocracy. Men wore heels first, painted, curled, often red, a color reserved for the privileged. Kings wore them. Courtiers imitated them. And slowly, heels trickled into women's fashion too. Not as function, as theater. In France, under Louis XIV, the Sun King red heels were a royal privilege. His own shoes were art pieces, tiny works of leather, silk, and embroidery. His court followed. Shoemakers were no longer anonymous artisans. They became famous, coveted. Their designs spread across Europe like rumors. In England, Queen Elizabeth I wore slippers with pearl embellishments, lace, gold thread. Shoes peeked from beneath enormous gowns, catching the candlelight. Their presence was fleeting, a glimpse, but powerful. A whisper of power wrapped in brocade. For commoners, things moved slower. Most wore practical boots or flat leather shoes, cobbled together from whatever they could find. But even these began to take on more shape. Lacing returned. Buckles became decorative. Soles thickened. Heels, modest ones, found their way into everyday wear. And for the first time, shoes began to reflect something new: personality. The rise of portraiture brought fashion into stillness. Paintings showed people posed in their finest, down to the tip of the toe. Shoes curled upward, patterns shimmered, embroidery told stories. Some showed allegiances, others vanity. but all spoke. Shoes no longer just protected your walk, they described it. Shoe shapes expanded and contracted. Square toes, rounded, pointed again. Styles shifted every few years, and slowly, cobblers began experimenting with something we now take for granted: sizing. Until now, shoes had been bespoke, cut and stitched for one person, one foot. But with growing trade, larger cities, and early commerce, a need for standards emerged. Not true mass production, not yet, but a sense of scale. Small, medium, large. A hint of the systems to come. As Europe spread through colonization and trade, so did its shoe styles. European boots walked across new continents. Leather shoes mixed with local materials. Moccasins met buckles. Sandals were reshaped. A global dialogue formed, not spoken, but stepped. Meanwhile, slippers became popular for indoor wear, delicate, quiet, often made of fabric, padded slightly, shaped to fit the drawing rooms and quiet parlors of the rising merchant class. For the first time, people owned house shoes. Footwear meant not for work or travel, but for presence. For being. Even the act of putting on shoes became more delicate. Shoe horns appeared. Brushes. Buckle polish. Storage boxes lined with velvet. Footwear wasn't just something you owned. It was something you cherished. And though the industrial world had yet to arrive, its shadow was forming. Shoes still took time to make. Days, weeks, each one hand-cut, hand-stitched, hand-finished. But the tools were improving. Patterns were standardizing. Leather was being tanned more efficiently. And a new kind of pressure was emerging. Speed. The world was moving faster. And shoes would have to catch up. The 20th century wasn't just an era of invention. It was an era of movement. Cities grew, industries roared. Streets buzzed with life. And shoes had to keep up. The pace of life was changing, and so was the way people moved through it. Factory-made shoes, once a novelty, became the norm. Mass production made footwear cheaper, faster, more consistent. It wasn't just cobblers making boots anymore. It was machines, assembly lines, conveyor belts. A new rhythm stamped into the souls of millions. By the early 1900s, shoes weren't just protective or decorative. They were categorized. Work shoes, dress shoes, school shoes, Sunday shoes, shoes for women, for men, for children, a pair for each occasion. And as these categories multiplied, so did expectations. What you wore on your feet wasn't just about function. It was becoming social code. In the 1920s, women's shoes shifted radically. Hemlines rose, and suddenly, ankles were visible. Shoes followed. Heels grew narrower. Straps and buckles became fashion statements. The Mary Jane, the T-strap, Art Deco accents, satin, suede, rhinestones. Evening shoes became glamorous. Delicate, sometimes impractical, often adored. People didn't just walk in them. They danced. The Charleston, the foxtrot, the jitterbug. Shoes moved to the rhythm of jazz. Men's shoes changed too. The Oxford, with its closed lacing and formal polish, became standard business wear. Wingtips, brogues, cap-toes, subtle variations that spoke volumes in offices and drawing rooms. On the streets, working-class men wore sturdy boots or plain leather loafers. Shine meant care. A scuffed toe said something else entirely. Then came the Great Depression. Simplicity returned. People resold shoes rather than buy new ones. Hand-me-downs became common. And in this austerity, creativity emerged. Women repurposed materials, cardboard, cork, fabric scraps, to make shoes last. Some even painted their shoes to match new outfits. Survival became style. World War II reshaped everything. Leather was rationed. Rubber was reserved for military needs. In the U.S., the government introduced guidelines for civilian footwear, limited styles, reduced materials. Utility was the law of the land. Soldiers were issued boots built for war. Durable, heavy, laced high for ankle support. They had to march through mud, through snow, through heat. These boots were not comfortable, but they endured. They survived. Back home, women filled factory jobs and wore thick-soled, close-toed shoes designed for standing long hours on concrete. No frills, just function. Wartime shoes weren't pretty, but they were strong. And so were the people who wore them. After the war, prosperity bloomed. So did fashion. And shoes, once utilitarian, exploded with personality. The 1950s brought saddle shoes, kitten heels, and glossy patent leather. Think poodle skirts, sock hops, black and white Oxfords dancing across gym floors. It wasn't just what shoes looked like anymore. It was what they sounded like. The click of a heel, the squeak of polished soles, the rhythm of footsteps echoing down newly paved suburban driveways. Meanwhile, high fashion reclaimed its throne. Designers like Salvatore Ferragamo experimented with cork platforms and architectural heels. Christian Dior paired his new silhouette with delicate pointed pumps. Shoes weren't just part of the outfit. They were the punctuation mark. In post-war America, the shoe store became a cultural staple. Rows of boxes stacked neatly. Salesmen with measuring stools and metal Brannock devices to find your perfect fit. A moment of attention. A small ritual. Sit down. Try it on. Walk a little. Feel the new sole under your weight. Say yes. Watch the box get tied up in twine and slid into a crisp paper bag. By the 1960s, youth culture changed everything again. Fashion rebelled. Loafers, moccasins, chunky heels, and go-go boots became loud, playful, defiant. Shoes were no longer just formal or functional. They were emotional, political. A statement against the generation before. In London, the Chelsea boot became synonymous with rock stars. In California, sandals and bare feet walked side by side. And on college campuses across the world, you could tell what someone believed by what they wore on their feet. Shoes were no longer just a response to terrain. They were a reflection of identity, expression. The ground beneath your feet wasn't just physical anymore. It was cultural. Shoes said something, even when you didn't. And yet, for all the change, one thing remained constant. Movement. Walking to work. Running to catch the bus. Dancing. Protesting. Pacing. Waiting. Shoes met the moment. They adapted. They absorbed it. And they kept going. The 1970s set the stage, but the 1980s lit the fuse. Sneakers had been around for decades by then. Canvas shoes with rubber soles, first made for sport, then slowly adopted for everyday wear. But something shifted. Sneakers stopped being quiet. They got loud, and the world listened. It started with performance. Running boomed. Fitness was in. Marathons grew more popular. Jogging became a hobby, not a chore. And companies noticed. Nike, Adidas, Puma. They weren't just making shoes anymore. They were engineering them. Cushioning, arch support, grip, lightweight foams, breathability. Shoes were becoming more than footwear. They were gear. Nike's breakthrough came in 1971, but it wasn't until the Air sole arrived, that puff of visible cushioning embedded in the midsole, that everything changed. The Air Tailwind. The Air Max. Shoes that looked futuristic, felt springy, and promised to help you run better, jump higher, go further. The science was exciting, but the marketing? That's what made them legends. Then came the moment, the name, the jump. Michael Jordan. In 1984, Nike signed a rookie basketball player with a fierce game and magnetic presence. The result was the Air Jordan 1, red, black, and white, with bold lines and sharper edges. The NBA banned them, said they violated uniform codes. Nike ran with it, literally. They launched an ad campaign that turned that ban into buzz. Banned by the NBA, the posters read, showing Jordan defying gravity. Kids didn't want to play like Mike. They wanted to wear like Mike. A sneaker wasn't just a shoe anymore. It was a symbol of cool, of aspiration, of rebellion. The Air Jordan line exploded. Every release was an event. Fans lined up. Scalpers flipped boxes. Collectors hoarded pairs like relics. And Nike? They leaned in. Signature shoes became the standard. Athletes weren't just endorsing, they were designing. Charles Barkley, Penny Hardaway, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. Each name came with a silhouette, a logo, a story. And Adidas? They didn't sit still. The Adidas Superstar, with its iconic shell toe, was born on the basketball court, but grew up in hip-hop. Run DMC made it famous. On stage, they wore the shoes unlaced, tongues out, swagger on full display. Their 1986 hit My Adidas wasn't just a song, it was a statement. Fans followed. Adidas noticed. A record deal became a sneaker deal. History was made. Sneakers spilled out of gyms and onto the streets. Skateboarders, dancers, graffiti artists, DJs, each subculture claimed its pair. Vans for skating, Puma Suedes for breakdancing, Converse All-Stars for everything else. It wasn't about performance anymore. It was about presence. What your shoes said when you walked into a room, or rolled into one. And through all this, the design language evolved. Shoes grew chunkier, wilder, bright neon panels, holographic tongues, crazy lacing systems, air pockets you could see through, pumps you could inflate on the go. It was part innovation, part playground. Every shoe was a conversation starter, a reflection of what mattered to you: speed, status, style, or just standing out. By the 1990s, sneakers were pop culture currency. You saw them in movies, on billboards, in music videos. Rap lyrics shouted out shoe names like Sacred Chants, Got My Nikes On, Fresh Pair of J's. Entire identities were built from the ground up. Streetwear wasn't a term yet, but it was being born, one step at a time. And people began to notice something else, that these shoes, once functional, were collectible. Drops became limited. Releases became exclusive. Dead stock entered the vocabulary. So did resale markets. A pair bought for $100 might sell for $300 a week later. or $1,000 or more. Boxes stayed unopened, tags left on. A sneaker was no longer just for wearing. It was for holding, owning, flaunting, flipping. Sneakerheads were born. Some wore their grails until the soles fell off. Others kept them pristine. Some hunted vintage pairs. Others waited all night in front of a store. A rare pair wasn't just a flex. It was a memory, a time capsule. You didn't just remember the shoe. You remembered the release, the moment, the version of yourself that needed them. And shoes adapted again. Brands teamed up with musicians, with artists, with designers. Sneakers became canvases, limited editions, collabs. You didn't have to be an athlete to have your own shoe anymore. You could be Kanye, or Pharrell, or Travis Scott, or someone the world hadn't heard of. Not yet. But who could design a drop so wild it broke the internet? The sneaker world became a universe. And it hasn't stopped expanding. By the time sneakers dominated sidewalks and subcultures, something else began to happen. Something quiet but powerful. Shoes became statements. Not just about taste or wealth or trend, but about belief, about belonging, about protest. The sole became a platform, and people began to speak through their feet. In the late 1960s, long before sneakers were fashion royalty, Olympic sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos stood on a podium in Mexico City. They had won medals. But they weren't smiling. Their heads were bowed, their fists were raised, and their shoes? Not on their feet. They stood barefoot, a silent protest against poverty and racial injustice. Their black Puma sneakers sat at their side, a symbol of what they left off and what they stood for. It wasn't the last time shoes made a statement. In the 1980s and 90s, the sneaker became a cultural flag, worn by the kids who felt overlooked, disrespected, misunderstood. Your shoes could get you attention, admiration, but sometimes trouble. In some neighborhoods, a coveted pair could make you a target, a risk, a reason to look over your shoulder. And so shoes, oddly enough, became political. Schools debated bans. Parents set rules. Communities clashed over whether sneakers were just sneakers or something more. And still, they endured. Because shoes were never just about walking. They were about arriving, claiming space, owning the room, even if you didn't have much else. And for many people, the right pair of shoes meant confidence, dignity, even safety. In more recent years, shoes have marched again, literally, in women's rights protests, in climate rallies, in marches for racial justice. Thousands of shoes, laced and ready, walked miles beside cardboard signs, enchanted voices. And sometimes, the shoes left behind told stories too. In silent vigils, people placed shoes in rows to represent lives lost, families torn, voices silenced. One shoe after another, each one with no feet inside. But still, speaking, fashion caught up. Designers began creating shoes meant to spark questions. Blood-red soles, clear plastic heels, shoes with words stitched across the toe. Resist. Vote. Enough. The runway wasn't just a stage for color and craft. It became a message board. Even the act of removing shoes, of going barefoot, gained new meaning. In some cases, it was reverence. In others, protest. Shoeless marches, barefoot classrooms, symbols of humility, of vulnerability, of stepping fully into a moment, unguarded. Meanwhile, the personal meaning of shoes deepened. For many, a particular pair of sneakers became a memory of a moment, a friend, a time of life. Shoes passed down from parent to child, wedding shoes tucked into boxes, work boots worn thin over years of labor, high heels kept in the closet long after the last time they were worn, just because they meant something. Shoes carried lives, not just on the outside, but inside. They told stories others couldn't see. The scuff from that one icy step, the paint fleck from the afternoon you redid the living room, the faint imprint from standing too long at a funeral, trying not to cry. They don't shout, but they hold things. Shoes are quiet like that, but they remember. In some cultures, shoes are considered so personal, so sacred, that you never bring them into the house. You leave them at the door, as a boundary, a transition, a way of saying, what's out there stays out there. In others, shoes are part of ceremony, shining before a wedding, lined up for a newborn, passed down like heirlooms. They are both practical and precious. And today, more than ever, shoes are aware of what they represent. They come in gender-neutral forms, adaptive designs, Velcro for hands that can't grip laces, zippered openings for those who need ease, not effort, lightweight for tired joints, durable for long days, shoes that speak to the body's needs, not the fashion calendar. Some brands make shoes that can be returned, taken apart, and made into something else. Circular design, sustainability, a new life for an old soul. Others lean on storytelling. Every drop comes with a name, a campaign, a theme. Shoes are no longer just products. They're narratives. And you get to choose. You stand in a store or browse from your phone, and you select something that feels right. A certain shape, a color, a memory. You don't always know why you like them, but you do. You put them on. You look down. You feel taller, grounded, ready. Shoes may change, but the feeling, that's timeless. Now the shoes are watching you. Not literally, not quite, but almost. You slip them on, and they sink. A small sensor tucked in the sole wakes up. It starts counting steps, measuring pressure, noting speed. Some even warm themselves on cold mornings, or tighten automatically when they feel your foot shift. You don't press a button. You don't tell them what to do. They just know. You walk, and the shoes adjust. Gently, quietly, like they've been paying attention. This is the age of smart footwear. A world where the shoe learns your rhythm, where it reminds you to move, where it connects to your phone, your watch, your playlist, where comfort isn't a guess, it's an algorithm, where the shoe knows if you've been sitting too long, where it tracks your gait, not to correct you, just to understand. Not all shoes do this, but more and more are starting to. And the ones that don't, they're changing too, because we've started asking different questions. Where did this shoe come from? Who made it? What happens when I throw it away? The world has woken up to waste, and shoes, once quietly built and quietly buried, have become part of the conversation. landfills filled with souls that never break down, rivers near factories dyed with chemicals, workers stitching for hours on end in places few ever see. And so, some shoes now speak differently. Some are built from recycled plastic, bottles plucked from oceans and reshaped into thread. Some are made of plants, sugarcane foam, algae soles, mushroom leather. Some dissolve, some biodegrade. Some return to the company that made them to be ground down and born again. They don't all look like the shoes you're used to, but they're trying. And alongside all this, a new whisper has emerged. Do we need shoes at all? The barefoot movement took root quietly. Some runners tossed their sneakers aside and went back to skin. They said the foot knew what it was doing. That shoes had softened us too much. That blisters and bruises were part of relearning. Others compromised, slipping into minimalist shoes with just enough between foot and ground. No heel, no arch, no cushion. Just a thin layer, like a second skin. It was controversial. It still is. Doctors debated, runners argued, some loved it, some hated it. But it made people think, not just about how shoes are made, but about why we wear them. Do they support? Do they shield? Do they express? Are they necessary or habitual? There's no single answer, but the questions remain. And as the world grows more digital, more virtual, even the shoes begin to blur. You can buy them, collect them, trade them, but you'll never wear them. They don't exist in your closet, only in your online identity, on a character, on a feed. Sometimes even on your own photo, a filter layered over your feet like magic. And yet, people care. People pay. Because shoes, even virtual ones, still say something. They still mark you, define you. They still walk with you, even if only in digital space. It's strange, but maybe not that strange. After all, shoes have always been more than they appear. We've always given them meaning. They've always followed us wherever we go. And now, we follow them too. You look down, and they're still there. Whatever pair you wear most often. Sneakers, slippers, boots, sandals. They're probably not pristine. A little scuffed. A little softened. The sole shaped by your weight. The laces remembering how you tie them. The bend near the toes where you always push off. They've become part of your routine, so familiar you barely notice them anymore. And maybe that's the point. Shoes aren't loud about what they do. They carry you. They wait patiently at the door. They sit beside the couch, under the bed, by the rug where you toss your keys at the end of the day. They're ready, quiet, loyal. And they've been with you more than you realize. Think of how many moments happened with shoes on your feet. The first day of school, the night you ran through rain with someone you loved. The job interview where you tapped your toe nervously, the walk you took to clear your head, the airport gate where you waited for news, the moment you danced in the kitchen alone. Each of those steps left a mark. On your memory, yes, but also on your shoes. Small smudges, imprints, creases. They're not flaws. They're evidence. The story of where you've been. You may not remember every pair. Some were worn and discarded. Some were given away. Some just disappeared over time, forgotten under beds or in closets or at the back of moving trucks. But you remember a few. The ones that mattered. The ones that lasted. The ones that hurt at first and softened later. The ones you didn't expect to love, but wore anyway. There are shoes that carried you through transitions. Breakups. Moves. Milestones. There are shoes you outgrew, literally and metaphorically, and some you held on to just because they reminded you of who you used to be. And now as you lie back and let your thoughts slow, maybe you think of your shoes a little differently. Not just as protection, or fashion, or function, but as companions. Some walked long miles with you. Some stood still through long days. Some never left the house but gave you comfort just by being there. Near the bed, on the stairs, by the front door, like a quiet promise that you could leave if you wanted to. And even when they're not on your feet, they're part of your rhythm. Because shoes are about movement, and movement is about life. Maybe that's why we feel a little strange when we leave the house barefoot, not just exposed, but unprepared, unanchored, as if something's missing, something that says, "I'm ready, let's go." Or maybe that's why we keep old pairs long after we've stopped wearing them, not out of need, but nostalgia, a little part of us still tied to the steps they took. And so, as you rest, maybe barefoot, maybe still wearing the shoes you forgot to take off, think of how far you've come. Not just in miles, in mornings, in routines, in quiet moments and loud ones. You've stood, walked, run, waited, wandered, and through it all, your shoes were there, steady, soft, holding the weight of your world, one step at a time. They don't ask for attention. They don't need applause. But they've earned a little gratitude because the journey has been long and they carried you through all of it.